This is my final presentation for ATR 6007. To introduce this data, let's imagine that I'm an athletic trainer at an NCAA Division II college. The data has been collected over the course of a school year and includes demographic information, injury and illness records, treatment visits, and physician referrals. After examining this data, I found a lot of inconsistencies, which you can see here. This included spelling errors, patient age, injuries after the initial evaluation, and extended missed days. I decided to correct any spelling errors. For example, diagnostic imaging was spelled incorrectly, or you can also see that football was spelled in an abbreviation and incorrectly. So I just made sure that all values were consistent across all of the tables. I also decided, for the sake of maintaining as much of the data as possible, to remove any outlier data while keeping the remaining data of the participant. So, for example, if we look at the patient category in the first color, we can see the last four rows are all patient ages that would be too young for college athletics. So instead of deleting those participants entirely and going back to the other tables and deleting their IDs as well, I decided to just remove their age so that way I could still keep their data of their injuries while maintaining consistent values for patient age because this didn't really affect the trends that I decided to examine. So for AI use, I decided to use ChatGPT. Trend for Prompt one for trend one was, can you find a trend between men's soccer and women's soccer athletes and the amount of reported ankle sprains? And for trend two, I said, can you find a trend between fall athletes as women's soccer, men's soccer, football, basketball, and men's and women's basketball, and spring athletes as baseball and softball, and the amount of reported injuries that were sent for a surgical referral. So I found that the outputs of chat were accurate and I verified those using pivot tables. I first merged data from patient and injury logs to include the sport column that were on the patient table. And then on the referral and patient data, I did the same thing and added that sport column to just have it all on one page to make the pivot table faster. So using this lookup function within this step made it significantly easier to locate the sport related to the information listed on each patient. So for data trend one, I looked at ankle sprains by gender and soccer athletes. So men's soccer athletes experienced more ankle sprains than women's soccer athletes did at this college. Men's soccer did report fewer total injuries. However, 17.4% of all men's soccer injuries were ankle sprains, where in women's soccer it was only 5%. So this is clinically relevant for me because it tells me that I need to incorporate more ankle injury prevention strategies like balance exercises, directional control, and proprioceptive training. So, clinical analysis of this data found, like I mentioned, that men's soccer experienced more ankle sprains than women's soccer. This data is clinically relevant as the athletic trainer because it tells me that a more targeted ankle injury prevention program should be implemented with the men's soccer team. This intervention would consist of balance training, like I mentioned, proprioception exercises, ankle strengthening, and dynamic change of direction activities that would help get them back into their sport. Athletes with a previous history of ankle sprains could also use prophylactic ankle taping or bracing to prevent this alongside the rehab program. So both should be done together. I wouldn't want to do just taping, but we could do just rehab if they haven't had them before. So the expected outcome of this would be a reduction in initial and recurrent ankle sprains. Additionally, it would reduce the amount of missed days of practice and competitions. To evaluate the effectiveness of this program, data on ankle sprains reported, recurrence rates, days lost to injury, and compliance with the program would be tracked across a season. So now for trend two, I looked at surgical referral by athlete sports season. So I decided to outline for AI what was considered a fall sport and what was considered a spring sport. So, what I considered fall sports were men's and women's soccer, men and women's basketball, and football. And what I considered spring sports were baseball and softball. So, with this, fall sport athletes were referred for surgery far more often than spring sport athletes, though this data set only included five total referrals. Three did go to fall sports and two went to spring sports. So, this is clinically relevant because it tells me that I need to anticipate medical needs, allocate resources, and develop injury prevention programs targeting high risk populations. So, although fall sports athletes had more injuries resulting in surgical referral than spring, the trend didn't seem severe enough yet for me to want to do an immediate intervention. Additional monitoring, I feel, would be the best way to continue with this here to determine whether it's consistent across multiple seasons or if this just happened this year. Key indicators would include the number of surgical referrals, injury types requiring surgery, and days lost to participation, or days lost from participation, sorry. Intervention would be considered if more than 10% of injuries within a sport require surgical referral. So, data should be reviewed monthly during the season, at the end of each season and annually. Gaps in the data that I would want to evaluate include training factors that contribute to injury risk by sport. I'd also want to look at environmental factors that might contribute to injury risk. I'd also be curious about nutritional factors. So, if our athletes are eating properly, getting enough sleep, and taking care of their bodies the way that they need to prevent getting injured in the future. Thank you.